What's up, guys? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of our videos. Also, make sure you follow us all over social media so you don't miss any of our content or show announcements. All right, let's move on to our surprises. So the two biggest surprises in the NBA this year, the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Now, very different in the sense that the Cavs were already considered like kind of a middle of the pack Eastern Conference playoff team that is overachieving to the top of the conference. Golden State, I think, was a team that most people around the league were pretty low on for good reason coming out of last year. They were well below 500 against teams that were 500 or better last season. A couple of big pivotal must-win games at the end of the year against mediocre teams. They lost both of them. Steph didn't look like a top 10 player anymore. There was some weird politics stuff going on. Like, it just looked like a team that maybe wasn't even worth investing in terms of making a deal. And just moving Kuminga to the bench, getting Clay out of there, having everybody buy into roles. All of a sudden, they have this 13-man rotation. I think they nailed every single signing from the summer. And even with Steph barely contributing to this point in the season, they're kicking everybody's butt, albeit against a light schedule. So between the Warriors and the Cavs, and we'll start with you, Logan, which of those two teams do you think has more potential to actually compete for a championship this year?
I think it's the Cavaliers, and I got to go Nick Collison here. I got to put my hand up. The people that you were describing preseason about both of these teams, I'm in both. I did not expect the Warriors to be close to 500 this year. I thought they were going to hover around there, but I didn't think they were going to overachieve, especially with Steph Curry out. Like, this team has been really resilient. They've battled every night, and I think this entire team really complements one another. I do think they have a glaring flaw that could come back to bite them. I'll get into that in a minute, but I do think it's Cleveland, and it starts with Evan Mobley's leap. Carson just did a video yesterday on Evan Mobley, which you guys can find on the Nerd Sesh YouTube channel if you're interested. Full breakdown on the development he's had this year, but he's already one of the best defenders on the planet. The Cavs are 9.4 points per 100 possessions better with Mobley. It's a difference between a defensive rating of 104.7 and 114.1. Mobley's been doing this. Carson called him the best defensive prospect he had ever evaluated at the time of the draft. He's always been really transformative on that end, and you could see that he was going to be really impactful there, but it's really about the offensive leap. First, Mobley's been a problem in transition. He's an 81st percentile transition scorer. And he can do it in both ways. Either if he's trailing the ball handler and just running the floor when you feed your big man, right? He's a problem there getting up and down with Garland and Mitchell. But he's also handling in transition, which is crazy. There was a play in the Milwaukee game where he gets a block at the rim, gets the ball at about the three-quarters line of the court, takes four dribbles, and is at the rim dunking it. Like, it's just insane stuff. Like that he can do that, but he's initiating from the perimeter. He's taking and shooting more confidently than ever. He's taking 2 threes a game. I know that's not a lot, but it's an improvement for Mobley. And again, he's taking them confidently. You're watching Mobley take floaters, post hooks. He's being more aggressive and more willing as a roll man. Like, and I want to be clear about something. The touch and the footwork are very much still a work in progress. You can see that game to game with Mobley, but he's getting and manufacturing high quality looks at such a high level. He just makes it look easy. It's not really about him getting to the looks. It's about Mobley making them. And so if he can cross over that barrier, I think there's even another leap that Mobley could, tap into, where you're looking at this guy potentially as maybe I think a 22 or 23 point per game scorer, and that's really deadly. But it's really about how he unlocks the rest of this team around him, because for the longest time, for years now, Carson and I have been talking about the dynamic and the fit with having two offensive-oriented guards in Garland and Mitchell, and then two very limited offensive players in Mobley and Allen. If Mobley can make this a legitimate leap, him and Allen can coexist and complement one another. And they can have a great defense alongside them. Garland also has returned to form. He was dealing with a broken jaw last year. He looks like he's come back in a big way. The last game against the Bucks, 39 points, 7 3-pointers. It's I underestimated them, guys. Like, I think the Cavs are my number two team out east. I thought the Knicks were clearly going to be the number two team, and it's close between them. I want to be clear about that, but I don't think the Knicks can do what the Cavs do defensively night to night. And I like their depth more this year, too. I was sleeping. I apologize, Dean Wade. Dean Wade is kind of a baller, guys. Karis LeVert off the bench can serve you a cool 20 whenever he needs to. Okoro is a good supporting piece off the bench. I love me some Ty Jerome. I have always loved Ty Jerome. I love what he gives this bench. He's not the most impactful guy, but he can make some good passes and hold up defensively. I just trust their defense and their depth more than the Knicks. And the reason I favor them over the Warriors, I'm impressed by their depth and all the pieces that they have. I just feel like the Warriors are a little small, and that can come back to get them. Looney and TJD are their tallest guys in the rotation at 6'9". I just feel like against bigger teams out west, that could get them. Like you guys said, they play fast, and I think that's how Golden State needs to play to win games. And this has been an impressive stretch without Steph, but I feel like the more jumbo-sized out teams in the West could just big body them in some playoff series. And that's why I'm hesitant to consider the Warriors a real contender.
I've been very impressed by both these teams, but I'm with you, Logan. I think that Cleveland is the more legit contender. And you touched on a lot of the reasons that I feel that way. The Mobley leap is a big deal. And I understand if you haven't watched the Cavs a ton and you're looking at the box score and you're saying, okay, what? He's averaging 17 and a half points per game compared to 15 points per game. Like, what's the big whoop there? He's being utilized in a totally different way in this offense. Logan mentioned how empowered he's been as a grab and go guy, pushing in transition. He is now running pick and roll, running inverted pick and roll, and has been effective there. He's driving twice as much per game. So there's just a different level of comfort and confidence we're seeing from him as a ball handler, as a driver, as a creator in this offense that I was always optimistic he'd develop as a prospect. I loved Evan Mobley as a prospect. He was my favorite guy, not just in that class, but in the past handful of drafts. But he just hadn't developed at the rate that I was hoping offensively through 3 years. And now we're seeing it. And he's not an offensive star, but he's a really good offensive player. And the significance of that does go past the box score. When you just have another legitimate threat on the floor, when you are playing these two big looks, and now you have a guy who actually can beat you from the 3-point line, right? Mobley's not going to jack up 4 or 5 threes a game, but he's been willingly taking a couple a night, and he's been making them at a solid clip. And he's also been much more willing to attack closeouts, right? So you have to at least respect him out to the 3-point line, and then he can put the ball on the floor and do some damage. That's always been the biggest question with the Cavs, is just, can they put together a legitimately good offense? I do not think that Evan Mobley single-handedly solves that, but I do think that he helps a good bit. And I think when you pair that with the fact that they are now starting the best shooting wing that they've had, certainly the best combination of both shooting and defense in Dean Wade, that makes this offense better. The difference between him and Isaac Okoro, who was 26% from deep on low volume in the playoffs, is big. And then when you add that Garland
Do you think
is
he starts
looking
over
better,
Strus when Strus comes back?
I think Strus is also a good combination of shooting and defense, but I would probably go with Dean. I think that Dean is the better defensive player. I think that his switchability is so valuable. But I think either way, that's not a bad option. And I think that your depth is better with those guys out there healthy. I just particularly have an issue with Okoro starting as he did a lot last year because of his offensive limitations. But I would keep starting Dean Wade. I think he's really good. But so then you add that in, you add the Mobley leap, you add that Garland is playing better offensively. And I always loved Garland, but I was super discouraged by last year's playoff run and just how passive he was, how much he was struggling. He looks much more confident after an offseason getting his body right. So, like, there's a lot of pieces coming together for Cleveland here. They're second in offensive rating right now, and I do not expect that to hold up. And in a contending context, that is still my concern, is what is their real ceiling offensively? And also their wing play isn't great, right? Shout out Dean Wade, shout out Max Strus. They have solid wings, but compared to some of the other teams who we're looking at, they still aren't stacked at the position group. But they look way better than last year. And I think that they clearly have the defensive ceiling. I think that now they have a bigger offensive punch to throw. I mean, their backcourt offensively is phenomenal. And we know what Donovan Mitchell can do in these playoff environments where he can play like a top 15 sort of player. But now the burden isn't quite the same on him to have to put up 25 shots a night because there is more skill around him offensively. So, Logan, you're talking about comparing them to the Knicks. I'm going to hold out before I make any declarations on that in terms of the postseason. But I think the Cavs are like your prototypical great regular season team with what they do defensively. And I do expect them to get that 2 seed. I just think fundamentally they're more talented than the Warriors, but I do love the Warriors' depth. I love their depth. It's ridiculous, right? I was at the first Pelicans game without Steph, and Lindy Waters just emerges in that game as like a legitimate NBA rotation player. They just have these dudes popping up out of nowhere. And Melton was a good ad. Kyle Anderson was a good ad. Buddy, phenomenal ad. And that's the last aspect that I really like about this Warriors team is the three-point shooting. I mean, they got a lot of dudes who can really shoot out there with Buddy, with Lindy Waters playing more. Pods is going to shoot much better than he has early in the year, and I'm just a believer in Pods, and I'm with you. Kuminga going to the bench is a big deal, so I'm not underestimating the Warriors at this point. I underestimated them before the year. I thought they were a play-in team. I think this team can win 50 games right now, and the crazy stat last year was with Steph on the floor, they were still an 82nd percentile offense, and the skill around him is clearly better this year, and Draymond is one of those great defensive anchors, and the team is totally bought in on that end. The Warriors are really good, but I do still worry about some of the size stuff against big teams. I do still worry about the lack of a real second shot creator, even though I think Buddy is playing out of his mind offensively right now. That's the thing that we've seen bite the Warriors a lot on the offensive end in recent years, and that does still concern me a little bit. And the shooting has been really good, but sometimes when you go with those Draymond, TJD lineups, you just want a little more offensive skill on the floor. I think I just have more red flags about the Warriors still, but they've been a joy to watch. And anytime that you put a good team around Steph Curry, that makes me happy to see because I was very, very discouraged about where they were at after last year. And I think that they've really been impressive.
So I think I actually disagree with both of you guys on this one. And the main reason why is I'm looking through everything through the context of Oklahoma City and Boston. So like, if we agree that Boston and Oklahoma City are kind of head and shoulders above everybody else and that they essentially represent the hurdles that anybody has to overcome in order to get out of their conference or to win the title, then I'm looking through things through the context of beating those specific teams. Now, that it gets complicated because you probably have to deal with different matchups on your way there. And neither Oklahoma City or Boston are particularly large on the front line in ways that could give Golden State issues or things along those lines, right? So, like, it's complicated. But the reason why I would say that I trust Golden State a little bit more is I specifically am interested in the way that their defense can match up with both Oklahoma City's offense and Boston's offense. Like, I'm super excited to watch tonight's game between Golden State and Boston. For the record, I think Boston will win. I think Steph's coming back from an injury. I think he's still even on a little bit of a minutes restriction. I don't know if they have the firepower. Boston is also extremely emotionally motivated to win that game after their kind of perceived slight surrounding the Team USA situation this summer. So like I'm not necessarily saying they're going to win, but I am really curious just to see how they guard. I think Steve's going to go in there and switch damn near everything and try to contain the ball and try to not overhelp and to try to force these guys to play one-on-one most of the night. And I'm just really curious to see how that looks because again, like when I look at Cleveland and I imagine them running into imagine them running into a team like Boston in a playoff series. They have such a unique gift, just like they did with Dallas in the finals last year. They are uniquely equipped to consistently expose your weak point on defense because of their depth of offensive initiation. They have so many different ways that they can initiate offense. And so, like, I do worry about Garland guarding in space. I do worry about teams picking on, if they think, oh, yeah, Dean Wade, really solid defender, but, maybe we can get dribble penetration on him if we go this way or that way. Donovan Mitchell's a guy, too, that, like, competes. He's physical, can apply a little bit of ball pressure, but historically not necessarily the best defensive player in the world when things are flying around, even though I think he had a really good defensive season last year. The point being there's just more entry points for Boston to get Cleveland into rotation. And then it becomes a simple question of like, do I think that Cleveland could ever hope to keep up with Boston offensively? And the answer is no. And when it comes to Golden State, like I just envision them as a team against both Oklahoma City and Boston as a team that can play at least four good defensive players at all times. Steph Curry is, he has been attacked a lot over the course of his career, and it's become something that teams do a ton. I'd like last summer, I went back and watched the Lakers series. They were going at Steph literally every single time down the floor. It's a big part of how teams look to attack the Golden State Warriors. But at the same time, they can anchor him with four really good defensive players that are switchable, that can cover a ton of ground, that sort of thing. And so I look at them as a team that I think just matches up better defensively with those two teams. Now, to be clear, in order for Golden State to make any sort of real noise, I think one, Steph has to return to at least close to what he was when he was in his prime, which he has not shown since the middle of last season. And then two, I think that they do need to hit on a consolidation trade, something that shrinks their rotation from having 13 playable guys to maybe 10 or 11, but you have an upgrade at backup center, or you have a forward that can really score the ball. And by the way, this is the year for that. Between Brandon Ingram being a guy that could be available, between Jeremy Grant being a guy that could be available, between Zach LaVine being a guy that could be available, like there are just a lot of guys that could be available this year at the 3-4 spot as someone who's like reliably capable of scoring 20 plus points a game efficiently. And so I think if on a real basic level, I just don't think Cleveland is capable of beating Boston. Like, I think there's like almost no pathway to victory there. Whereas with Golden State, I can kind of see like switching, containing, forcing turnovers, stagnating them. Oh, they hit on a couple deals too, so they've got a little bit more firepower. And Steph Curry just kind of, mentally dominates the series the way that he did in 2022. But again, to be clear, I would not pick either of those teams against Boston or Oklahoma City. I think they're on a separate tier. But if I had to pick between the two of them, I think Golden State kind of has a unique build that could challenge those two teams.